Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Now today, as the title suggests, I am doing a review on the book Lore by Alexandra Bracken. This book is said to be a combination of Hunger Games and Greek mythology, and I had no idea that Alexandra Bracken was of Greek heritage because I also grew up with Greek mythology and I'm also of Greek heritage, so I thought this would be the perfect book to have as my first review on this channel. While this book might be set in New York City, there is something supernatural going on. There is an Aegon, a contest that happens every 7 years, and as punishment, Zeus sends 9 of the gods to compete amongst the mortals. The mortals are hungry for power because if they kill a god, they gain all that divinity and power that comes with killing that god. So of course, it is very, very tense and the stakes are really high, especially for the gods. Our main character, Lore, has fled this world and this community. It is really brutal, especially after her family had been murdered by one of the leaders of a competing bloodline who now happens to be a god. But since the next Aegon is set in New York City, she ends up bumping into a long-lost friend of hers who she thought was long dead, Castor, and a gravely wounded Athena that lands on her front doorstep. She ends up forming an alliance with Athena and getting back into the game, and of course the flames of revenge for Lore have definitely been fanned. And so this is where our story begins, and let me tell you, off of the first few pages, I was definitely hooked and the pace was definitely fast. I'm gonna go through a few points today. So first, I'm gonna start off with the world building. Then I'm gonna go on to the story and the plot. Then I'm gonna talk about the writing, followed by the characters. And then lastly, I'm gonna tell you how much I enjoyed it and the rating that I ended up giving it, all of which you can find on Goodreads, but I thought I would give a more fleshed out review in this video. Starting off with the world building, of course, this Aegon is set in New York City and we're all very familiar with New York City. However, I feel like that is a bit of a cop-out for the author because I don't feel like she went into the world building as much as my standards needed. So of course, we don't need New York City to be explained because we're all familiar with it, like I said. However, I would have liked a little bit more history on the Aegon and how we all got here. A little more than just punishment for the gods and now we're here and these are the bloodlines and here you go. I felt like we were kind of thrust into the world without having an appropriate background of how the Aegon got started, how the competition got started, how these bloodlines got involved in the Aegon, which I don't think we ever go through. And so for me, I feel like I'm missing a big picture view of this world, one which I don't have. We do get history about Lore and Lore's family and how they were murdered, so that's great. We do get the bits and pieces that we need to know for the story, but I feel like you can't just get the small pieces that you need for the story to make sense. For me, that doesn't make sense. I need to see the whole picture of how we even got to this point and how we even got to an Aegon in the first place, which the author really doesn't give us, in my opinion. And so for such a monumentous occasion, like having this big Aegon that is set in different major cities across the world, I feel like we got way too little information about this huge thing that's supposedly happening now after 7 years and has been happening for centuries. As like a mythology lover, I also found that the whole punishment of the gods by Zeus didn't make sense in the sense that these are 9 powerful gods that were punished by Zeus. I feel like he is very powerful, very, very, very powerful, but they're also powerful in their own right. And all 9 of them together could have been a powerful force to just refuse this demand by Zeus. And so I found that to be a little unrealistic just in knowing what I know about mythology, that like the 9 gods would just conveniently agree to it, which is why I felt like I needed more of an explanation for the world building and how we got here, how they were punished, how they got to agreeing to even do this every 7 years. Because I just don't think that the Greek gods would ever really agree to something like that. But again, we don't get details, we only get the amount that we need to know so that we can follow along with Lore and her backstory instead of understanding the entire world of the Aegon itself. So unfortunately, world building was kind of a letdown for me, and that definitely hinders in my ability to understand and really get sucked into the story. However, the plot and the story itself was very thrilling. I mean, I was sucked into just the fast pace, the action-packed-ness of the story. There was always a battle, there was tension, there was usually pretty high stakes in almost every chapter and every scene. We also got snippets of Lore's past every now and then within the story to help us understand as events unfolded what was going on in her mind, what had happened to her, exactly how her parents had been murdered, exactly what had happened before they were murdered and when she was younger and her parents participated in the Aegon. That was all really interesting and all really well done, and I feel like I read through this book faster because I felt like the plot was really moving and there was a lot given to us and there were some pretty high stakes. The one thing I want to mention is if you're a Hunger Games fan going into this, Hunger Games definitely did have killing, but I felt like this book had a lot more senseless killing. Hopefully that's not a spoiler because the synopsis does give us this kind of bloodthirsty eagerness of these bloodlines to be killing each other, to be getting divine powers. But I just felt like it was a lot of senseless dead bodies all over New York City, and the way that that was explained also didn't make a lot of sense. Like, I don't believe that. I know New York has lots of crime, you know, things happen in New York that we don't always know about, but that many dead bodies are definitely going to be noticed by anybody in New York. But she definitely made me want to keep reading. And so I'm gonna now move on to her writing. Her writing is very easy, it's very accessible, it's easily digestible. I felt like I could read through it really quickly. I understood what was going on. She doesn't go into too much prose, there isn't too much flowery language. Even though the book is long, she does get to the point and things happen quickly. So I like that about her writing. It was easy to digest and definitely a YA level style of writing. I can understand how some folks might not like it because it is more simplistic. However, I think for this book and for this plot, it worked really, really well. There is also a little bit of romance in this book. It's very chaste because it is a YA, or like at least the younger side of YA, but the author really does focus on the plot and the characters and those interactions more than the subtleties and the romance in the book, which I actually really enjoyed. And again, the novel definitely captivated me. So I'm going to move on to the characters. Now, Lore, who's our main character, I felt was very well fleshed out. She was complex, there was a lot going on with her. You understood a lot about her past and her feelings, and there was also like a lot of complex feelings within her that she struggled to reconcile with, which I thought was very relatable. I mean, any person that's faced with difficult situations is going to have very complex feelings. It's not going to be very cut and dry, and she certainly had all of those feelings and was a very complex, multifaceted human and person in the story, and that made me really enjoy Lore and enjoy reading about her, and it also made me care about her a lot more because she was so relatable and she felt so real. However, the other characters didn't have as much multifacetedness, if that's even a word, as Lore had. Now, Castor is another one that we follow and that you end up caring about, but he falls a little flat for me. As you get into the story and Lore becomes more complex, you're also kind of hoping, at least for me, that Castor also gets more complex because they were such good friends back in the day, and they have to also band forces to go through this cycle of the Aegon. And while she does give Castor one huge flaw, she fails to give him other nuances in personality and in interaction that would make his character a lot more real and a lot more relatable, so that you would really care about him that much more. You still care about him. I still cared about him and I wanted him to be okay, of course, but I definitely cared about Lore more, and Lore just felt more like a real human being and a real character in this world. The other thing that I didn't really like and that didn't make sense to me in terms of character outline was that the gods, as you'll find out very quickly when you read this book, are often read to be very emotionless, very cold beings. However, they have all these feelings of revenge and desire and sadness and vengeance and all these dark emotions. However, they're said to be emotionless. So I think just because the gods don't show their like softer emotions or their happier emotions doesn't make them emotionless. And I don't think that was a strong way to describe the gods, because they weren't emotionless, they just didn't show their happier emotions. They were just filled with a lot more dark, brooding emotions than they were with happy ones. And so I was always confused when a god was described as cold or emotionless. I was left wondering, like, well, aren't all of those emotions that they're explaining and sensing right now also valid emotions? It just didn't make sense. It didn't tie in well with the story. And I just felt like the gods were supposed to be these cold, manipulative, killing machines, where really they had a lot of emotions and a lot of intention in what they were doing. So the next point that I want to get to, and the last point, is enjoyability. I did enjoy this novel. I ended up giving it a 3 stars, which is still a good rating, but because of all of the points that I made earlier, I just couldn't give it a 4 or 5 stars. I still really enjoyed it, and I can definitely foresee this being a popular and well-liked read. I think it's fun. I think it's easy. It's definitely a lighter read that you can include between heavier types of novels. I think it's fun. It's fast-paced. It's easy to get through, and I can see a lot of younger readers really enjoying it and not paying too much mind to what I mentioned before. Like, it probably wouldn't bother them as much as it bothers me as a reader. And so would I recommend this book? I would say yeah, I would recommend this book. I think if you like Greek mythology and Hunger Games and you're not too bothered about the points that I mentioned earlier, then this might be a book that you really enjoy and that you really give a 5 stars to, even though I didn't. And again, I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy it, so of course I'm going to go ahead and recommend it. I just think if you have the same type of standards that I do, you might not enjoy it as much. However, if you have read the book, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, so please leave your comments down below. Or if you're excited for this book, please let me know as well. And that concludes the first review on my channel. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that it was useful to you. If you liked this video, please click the like button below. And if you like my content and you enjoyed this video as well, please go ahead and subscribe. Thank you.